Good day, everyone. My name is Marie-Hélène and I welcome you to the group exhibit Hydrogen Fuel Cell Batteries 2015. It's the 21st edition, and we have a great topic, which I'm sure that's why you're in great numbers right now. We'll discuss public acceptance of hydrogen technologies and application. Please help me welcome from HySafe the president, Dr. Andrei Tchouvelev, and the vice president, Dr. Thomas Jordan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I think I'll start this interview with the question as simple as, is hydrogen safe?
Thank you. This is a very fair question to ask. So the short answer, yes, absolutely, it is. As people here know, and we heard from Linda just a minute ago, the companies like Linde and Air Products and Air Liquide and others have been handling hydrogen for more than 100 years with amazingly safe track record. So there's no question hydrogen is a safe fuel. And putting it in a risk perspective, it certainly doesn't bring more risks than any other fuel that we know today. We are the International Association for Hydrogen Safety, and our focal point is to be the focal point, or rather our vision is to see the hydrogen as being introduced as a safe and sustainable fuel, and our mission is to be the focal point for coordinating of research, knowledge dissemination, education and training. So when people make decisions what is safe or unsafe, they need to be based on facts, not gossips. And that's really what we are trying to do here. But I would like to mention an important point there, is that why we're discussing public acceptance here, though we are Hydrogen Safety Association, is because it's pretty clear that safety is just one component of public acceptance. There are other values that go into the decision making when people accept or not accept something. And safety is certainly a very important component, but I think we're getting to the point where the safety is implied. Look at the ride and drive events. People don't give a second thought, they just jump excitedly into the cars and drive because it's clearly implied that whatever they drive is safe.
Well, so you say just like the right program behind here, that is, people just jump in the car, so there seems to be a public acceptance, but at the same rate, in some areas you still find reluctance from the public. What do you think is needed next to really make people accept the technology or the hydrogen as a safe fuel?
Well, let's go back to the history. I will indulge the audience with some facts and some irony in terms of the internal combustion engine and gasoline and hydrogen and fuel cells. It's quite ironic that hydrogen was actually discovered long before gasoline. That was in 1781 by Cavendish, and then the term hydrogen was proposed by Lavoisier and accepted in 1787. Electrolysis of water was actually known before Sir William Grove invented his gas battery, which it wasn't called fuel cell, it was called 50 years later that way, but he proved that the electrolysis of water could be reversed. So it was as early as 1839. That's why Jules Verne, in his famous Mysterious Island novel, said that water is the coal of the future, predicting that it will be decomposed into hydrogen and oxygen, right? But it's interesting evolution in that is that at that time, coal was the symbol of progress. It was widely publicly accepted. People were excited of these fumes and clouds, and if you go back to some movies earlier last century, it was kind of in the picture that you have big stacks and the fume, and this was symbol of progress, right?
Of improvement, of industrialization.
Exactly. So there were different values in the society that then accepted. Gasoline was discovered in 1870s, and it was not very well accepted at the beginning. There was a very known report by the U.S. Congress Horseless Committee in 1875 that warned about the dangers of gasoline, and they were predicting that it might destroy the agriculture because the horses will not be in need anymore. But there were other values. People valued individual transportation. They valued the freedom of movement and other things. But it's interesting that the progress of internal combustion engine slowed down the progress of the fuel cells, because the fuel cell as a fuel cell was really developed in 1889. It was called fuel cell. So this was a parallel development which was dominated by internal combustion engine, and that it internally prevailed. So now we are in a different society with different values. Coal is not a symbol of progress anymore, it's a dirty word. So there are different values. Safety is one of them, but the environment, well-being, health, sustainability, those are the values we now bringing up, and that's where hydrogen shines.
So as we talk to values, I want to touch base, but I just want to remind everybody, this is a public forum, so you're more than welcome. And I'll come down with the microphone if you have any question for both Mr. Jordan or Dr. Tchouvelev. But this question will be addressed to Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan, you were just mentioning about the fact that it's a bit of a value progress for public acceptance. So in your opinion, do you think it's more education required, or it's a matter that people need to have the technology in their hands to just publicly accept it?
Well, we know from other energy carriers or sources of energy, however you call it, that acceptance depends on many factors. Some of them are individually coined. So if you have a individual benefit by using something, or you can have a technology close to you, then it's easier to accept and easier to understand the specific profile of this energy carrier. So everybody has a plug for electricity at home, although could kill you if you put your fingers in there. So I think the basic principles of hydrogen are understood by the majority. I think there is not an overly wrong perception about the hazard profile of hydrogen. In my view, acceptance mainly relies on the issues regarding economies. So if somebody decides for a certain technology, then he decides mainly on economic aspects. So
you don't think maybe the misconception of unsafe would slow down the acceptance?
Well, there's, awareness is somehow coined by existence of experience. So if you have experience like watching every day the Hindenburg accident, this will somehow influence your awareness. If you see or would see a major accident with the refueling station, this would also somehow influence your sort of awareness or acceptance level. So we have to differ acceptance and awareness. As long as you do not have a direct experience of these technologies, as long as you're pretty open, because at least in a German study, which was named High Trust, the targeted cross-section of people who were asked about their perception and acceptance were quite positive. So hydrogen is associated with a green aspect, it's associated with a clean energy. Of course, there are associations with the major accidents and confusion about things like the hydrogen bomb, which has nothing to do with the actual hydrogen energy carrier. So I'm quite sure if we impose the right political boundary conditions to introduce economic solutions based on hydrogen, we will go for it.
Well, and it's also, if you always talk to someone that ever drove a hydrogen vehicle or took a hydrogen bus, they don't want to go back. It's an experience in itself, and I think that's where you gain the acceptance from the public and realize that, yeah, it's green, it's great, it's low noise, it's low toxicity. I can't speak English. Toxicity. And if we actually get into the technicals of hydrogen a little bit, could you give me more information on Dr. Tchouvelev on the flammability portion, things that usually may scare people compared to other fuels that we deal with on a daily basis?
Yes, certainly. That's a fair question to look at. If you go into the technical details, safety, as we all realize, is a societal and psychological concept. You cannot really quantify safety rather than through risk. So, on our daily basis, we don't ask a question, is gasoline safe? We just jump into a car and drive, or we just go to the station and fuel. But it's interesting that although the first fueling of gasoline happened in 1888 in Germany in a pharmacy, it took about 60 years for the first unattended fueling. So self-fueling, the first was demonstrated in 1947 in California. And it's interesting, in the United States, there are still two states, New Jersey and Oregon, that do not allow self-fueling of the cars. Whether it is related to the way we do fueling, because we just stick it there, and people smell gasoline every time they fuel. And that's a habit. There's nothing wrong with it. We don't dial 911 or call fire department, right? We just...
Even though it's a toxic vapor.
It's a toxic vapor. And I don't know how many people know that, but the low flammability limit of gasoline is 4 times lower than hydrogen. So it's well documented in an FBA reports that percentage of ignition of gasoline fumes at their fueling stations is pretty high. So we as users, as customers, we accept that risk, and that's from a technical point of view, knowingly taking the risk and unknowingly as two different things. So we accept this as part of our life, as part of the comfort, and that's okay. But if you put the numbers comparing the fuel, hydrogen certainly shines in comparison with conventional fuels like gasoline or LPG in particular.
How does it shine? Simply by having actual less.
Well, let's look at the refueling process. I slightly mentioned that. Again, when we fuel a gasoline car, it's open. You always have air in your gasoline tank, which is not really a good idea to have. You cannot fuel a hydrogen vehicle like you fuel a gasoline car. If you just open the nozzle, nothing happens. You have to establish the back pressure inside your tank. So there's significant safety in that. And if you don't establish the back pressure on the line, you will not be able to fuel. The amount of energy in the hose of a hydrogen there is significantly less than gasoline because it's 60 times heavier there than hydrogen. So even there is an accidental release or breakaway, it's a trivial amount. And we all know that in the open, if you release hydrogen, it's almost 15 times lighter than air, so it will just disperse safely up. Well, if you have a puddle of gasoline, excuse me, it will stay there, evaporate, create a vapor cloud that may meet an ignition source. So that's...
We have a question from the floor,
Yes,
actually,
please.
so I'll move on the microphone.
David.
So for the public to become more trusting of hydrogen, you have to create this cumulative set of voices across a broad spectrum, not just the practitioners, not just us, the players who are in love with the technology or the science or the philosophy or the theory, but this broad set of people, many of whom are impatient when it comes to science and impatient when it comes to understanding flammability limits. Could you talk, both you gentlemen know a lot about this. Could you talk a little bit about how do you do that?
Thank you, David. That's a very good question. And in my professional career, I very often meet regulators and people from fire departments. So educational awareness, education training is absolutely key. It's important to get these people exposed to hydrogen technologies, to state-of-the-art facilities. And a very recent experience that we had every time proves the same thing. The skeptics or the skepticism will stop right there. When the facts laid on the table, when the actual units are being shown, the design strategy, the philosophy, how do you ensure safety is explained. It's absolutely, they just say, where do we sign in? We're all for it. And these are the people whom public trusts most. The fire people, building officials, regulators, because they, from this perspective, and their job is to protect the public. So if they are on site, the battle is won. And of course, what Thomas mentioned is that the personal experience. So events like this, Ride and Drive, more and more exposure to technology will eventually do the job. And obviously, again, as you mentioned, policies, policies at the government, provincial levels, that will help stir the public and economy grow in a certain direction.
So in Europe and in Germany, there is a lot of demonstration of these technologies, although many of these demonstrations are limited regarding the possible perception, meaning the number of interfacing people is relatively small. We operate 2 fuel cell buses at KIT, and we have about 70,000 passengers per year. Most of them are fascinated by the technology. We have bus drivers those who drove the buses, they like it. Those who refuse, they have some safety concerns. We try to respond and try to give them a touch on hydrogen to reduce this fear about, let's say, it's not rational, this feeling, but it's coined by historical things and by wrong understanding of things. You can try to teach, you can openly promote the technologies, but again, as long as it's not really feasible for individuals to buy in. You know, like with photovoltaics. Everybody likes to have a photovoltaic installation on his home roof. And as long as we are far from the ability, from the average person here or there to buy such technologies, I think it will be difficult to have a broad acceptance of these technologies.
Is this something as simple as we should introduce in primary classes at school? Hydrogen 101.
This is done. This is done partially. We have some activities in Europe about this, although the numbers are still small of teaching hydrogen and how to deal with. There are these toy sets. You can show this to children. The major point which we missed so far, I think, we have to be very careful to avoid a major incident which would somehow foster this negative attitude, which is in a certain percentage of the population there. And if you would support this negative attitude by a major incident, then we had a major issue regarding acceptance. So far, nothing seriously happened. But it's a matter of statistics that something will come if you ramp up technologies, if you increase inventories, if you increase flows of these technologies, there will be something. That's clear. And you have to be prepared to answer things if something happens. And this is why we are here,
And that's the mandate at HySafe to work on the regulation portion.
And just to comment on that, this is absolutely valid point. We all want to event. Sorry, we are running out of time. No? Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah, we certainly want to avoid major accidents, but there have been incidents, and it's interesting that there were incidents in California, in Europe, when there were fires with the, say, hydrogen trucks and on the stationary units. But it's interesting, the conclusion that even fire people made is that thank God that was not propane or gasoline, it was hydrogen, because they were able to deal with the incident significantly faster and better than would it be hydrocarbon fuel. So that's already established fact. By communicating with the fire department, as I mentioned earlier, developing emergency response planning, that's all very necessary. That's all being done as part of the installations that are being deployed. So it's kind of taken care of as we go. More needs to be done, there's absolutely, but it will be a natural process as we grow. But certainly the knowledge is here. The curriculums for such training has been developed or being developed. We within the HySafe, we have been supporting education of students at the summer schools, at the short courses. There's a Master of Science program at the University of Ulster that we are supporting and stuff like that. We have regular biannual conferences that we have next. The next one will be in Tokyo and Yokohama. So that part is certainly building up.
Well, unfortunately, we actually exceeded time, so I will invite everybody, if you have more questions for Dr. Tchouvelev or Mr. Jordan, to meet them at their booth, which is just located on the other side over here, or right after. They'll hang around.
E65.
E65.
Yes.
Thank you to the public for your time, as well as both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And stay tuned, right coming up with Steiger, advancing the fuel cell business through optimized solenoid valves, right in a minute. Thank you for your time.